Hello and welcome to today's edition of The Jungle. Today we're going to be reading pages 20 to probably 24. We'll see. Chapter 2. Oh, page 21, sorry. Chapter 2. Jurgis talked lightly about work because he was young. They told him stories about the breaking down of men there in the stockyards of Chicago and of what had happened to them afterwards. Stories to make your flesh creep. But Jurgis would only laugh. He had only been there for 4 months, and he was young and a giant besides. There was too much health in him. He could not even imagine how it would feel like to be beaten. "That is well enough for men like you," he would say, "silpnas, puny fellows. But my back is broad." Jurgis was like a boy from the country. He was the sort of man the bosses liked to get hold of, the sort that they made it a grievance that they could not get hold of. When he was told to go to a certain place, he would go there on the run. When he had nothing to do for the moment, he would stand round fidgeting, dancing, with the overflow of energy that was in him. If he were working in a line of men, the line always moved too slowly for him, and you could pick him out by his impatience and restlessness. That was why he had been picked out on one important occasion, for Jurgis had stood outside of Brown and Company's Central Time Station not more than half an hour the second day of his arrival in Chicago before he had been beckoned by one of the bosses. Of this he was very proud, and it made him more disposed than ever to laugh at the pessimists. In vain would they all tell him that there were men in that crowd from which he had been chosen who had stood there a month, yes, many months, and had not yet been chosen. "Yes," he would say, "but what sort of men? Broken down tramps and good-for-nothings, fellows who have spent all their money drinking and want to get more for it. Do you want me to believe that with these arms," and he would clench his fists and hold them in the air so that you might see the rolling muscles, "that with arms like these, people will ever let me starve? It is plain," they would answer to this, "that you have come from the country, and very far in the country." And this was the fact, for Jurgis had never seen a city, and scarcely even a fair-sized town, until he had set out to make his fortune in the world, and earn his right to Ona. His father and his father's father before him, and as many ancestors back as legend could go, had lived in a part of Lithuania known as Breklavik, the imperial forest. This was a great tract of 100,000 acres, which from time immemorial has been a hunting preserve of the nobility. There are very few peasants settled in it, holding title from ancient times, and one of these was Antanas Rudkis, who had been reared himself, and had reared his children in turn, upon 6 acres of cleared land in the midst of a wilderness. There had been one son beside Jurgis, and one sister. The former had been drafted into the army. That had been over 10 years ago, but since that day, nothing had ever been heard of him. The sister was married, and her husband had bought the place when old Antanas had decided to go with his son. It was nearly a year and a half ago that Jurgis had met Ona at a horse fair 100 miles from home. Jurgis had never expected to get married. He had laughed at it as a foolish trap for a man to walk into. But here, without ever having spoken a word to her, with no more than the exchange of 6 smiles, he found himself, purple in the face with embarrassment and terror, asking her parents to sell her to him for his wife, and offering his father's 2 horses he had been sent to the fair to sell. So this sounds horrid, but it's really how things were done. A boy offered the girl's father money in order to marry the girl, in some cultures. In other cultures, the girl was expected to offer a dowry or to bring something to the marriage to give to the man for the sake of taking her off of her father's hands. Just kind of depends on the culture which way it was supposed to go. Sorry for all the cat fur flying around in the middle of the video now. Thank you, Zardari. But Ona's father proved as a rock. The girl was yet a child, and he was a rich man, and his daughter was not to be had in that way. So Jurgis went home with a heavy heart, and that spring and summer toiled and tried hard to forget. In the fall, after the harvest was over, he saw that it would not do, and tramped the full fortnight's journey that lay between him and Ona. He found an unexpected state of affairs, For the girl's father had died, and his estate was tied up with creditors, meaning that his father had died owing people money, and so they were all claiming parts of his estate as payment for their debts. Jurgis's heart leaped as he realized that now the prize was within his reach. There was Elzbieta Lukasite, Teta, or aunt, as they called her. Teta, and where they called Antanas, Dede Antanas. Those are, in English we call them honorifics, meaning like titles of honor, or titles of respect that you would give to an adult with whom like you aren't on the same social level as them, so it's not really okay to just call them by their first name, that you would give them kind of these honorific titles. Somebody who you may not be related to, but you call aunt, or you call uncle, or something. There are lots of other possibilities for it, but something like that would be an honorific. Okay, there was Elzbieta Lukasite, Teta, or aunt as they called her, Ona's stepmother, and there were her 6 children of all ages. There was also her brother Jonas, a dried-up little man who had worked upon the farm. They were people of great consequence, it seemed to Jurgis, fresh out of the woods. Ona knew how to read, and knew many other things that he did not know, and now the farm had been sold, and the whole family was adrift, all they owned in the world being about 700 rubles, which is half as many dollars. They would have had 3 times that, but it had gone to court and the judge had decided against them, and it had cost the balance to get him to change his decision. Ona might have married and left them, but she would not, for she loved Teta Elzbieta. This is not a, like I said at the intro, this is not like a hateful stepmother, an evil stepmother situation. It was Jonas who suggested that they all go to America, where a friend of his had gotten rich. He would work for his part, and the women would work, and some of the children, doubtless, they would live somehow. Jurgis, too, had heard of America. That was a country where, they said, a man might earn 3 rubles a day. And Jurgis figured what 3 rubles a day would mean, with prices as they were where he lived, and decided forthwith that he would go to America and marry and be a rich man in the bargain. In that country, rich or poor, a man was free, it was said. He did not have to go into the army. He did not have to pay out his money to rascally officials. He might do as he pleased and count himself as good as any other man. So America was a place of which lovers and young people dreamed. If only one could manage to get the price of a passage, he could count his troubles at an end. It was arranged that they should leave the following spring, and meantime Jurgis sold himself to a contractor for a certain time and tramped nearly 400 miles from home with a gang of men to work upon a railroad in Smolensk. This was a fearful experience, with filth and bad food and cruelty and overwork. But Jurgis stood it and came out in fine trim, and with 80 rubles sewed up in his coat. Okay, another fashion lesson for a second while I wipe the cat fur off my nose. This was before pockets had been invented, really. And that sounds silly, but if you think about it, to make a pocket in a piece of clothing, you have to have extra fabric. And so, in a place and a time where fabric was expensive and people couldn't afford very much in the way of clothing at all, you certainly weren't going to pay extra money to have pockets sewed into your clothes. So what a lot of people did to carry their money was actually pick apart the seam of like their jacket, and sew the money up inside the seam, because they'd be wearing that jacket every day. People didn't have multiple outfits to wear. You maybe had 2 outfits or 3 outfits and you wore the same thing day after day, so that way all your money was close to you and kept a lot safer. Jurgis did not drink or fight, because he was thinking all the time of Ona. And for the rest, he was a quiet, steady man who did what he was told to, did not lose his temper often, and when he did lose it, made the offender anxious that he should not lose it again. When they paid him off, he dodged the company gamblers and dram shops, and so they tried to kill him. But he escaped and tramped at home, working at odd jobs and sleeping always with one eye open. And this was really common not only in Lithuania but also in the United States, that when you got paid for a job, oftentimes your employer also owned gambling operations and bars, and they expected you to then turn around and basically hand your paycheck back to them in the form of drinking at the bars or gambling in the gambling shops. That's just the way that was supposed to go. Like, they hand the paycheck to you, and you hand it back to them. Now we're all even. Well, Jurgis doesn't do that, and so they try and kill him to get the money back, but he manages to get away. So in the summertime, they had all set out for America. At the last moment, there joined them Maria, whose last name I'm not even going to try, I'm so sorry, Lithuania, who was a cousin of Ona's. Maria was an orphan, and had worked since childhood for a rich farmer of Vilna, who beat her regularly. It was only at the age of 20 that it had occurred to Maria to try her strength, when she had risen up and nearly murdered the man, and then come away. Okay, this was also very common for the time period, that if your parents were dead, if you were an orphan, instead of going to an orphanage, or instead of going into today what we call the foster care system, which is what would happen to you today if your parents died. We don't really have orphanages per se anymore. What they would do in early America and in a lot of other countries was that you would be sold to somebody as an indentured servant, meaning that you would go live in their house and they would have to feed you something. They didn't have to feed you well, and they would have to give you somewhere to sleep, but it didn't have to be a nice place, and you were basically tied to them. You had to, by law, work for them for a certain number of years to kind of pay off your room and board then. You weren't part of their family. They weren't expected to treat you like a part of the family. You were there to do work. And even at a very young age, 8, 9, 10 years old, you might be passed off to a family like this. So Maria's story is that she had been an orphan. She got sent to work for this farmer who beat her all the time and was really horrible to her. One day she wakes up and she's like, I'm way bigger and stronger than he is. She beats the crap out of him to the point of almost killing him, and then she's wanted for murder, so she decides maybe she'll come to the United States with everybody else. There were 12 in all in the party, 5 adults and 6 children, and Ona, who was a little of both. They had a hard time on the passage. There was an agent who helped them, but he proved a scoundrel and got them into a trap with some officials and cost them a good deal of their precious money, which they clung to with such horrible fear. This happened to them again in New York, for, of course, they knew nothing about the country and had no one to tell them, and it was easy for a man in a blue uniform to lead them away and take them to a hotel and keep them there and make them pay enormous charges to get away. The law says that the rate card shall be on the door of a hotel, but it does not say that it shall have to be written in Lithuanian. Okay, I want to take just a moment to talk about this. This is the way that a lot of sex trafficking happens today, human trafficking in general. That human traffickers will go to very poor countries where they're looking at a village where nobody has much of an education, and they'll say, particularly to the women of the village, hey, we have these great jobs in the United States. You're going to come and you're going to work in a hotel, a fancy hotel in the United States. It's going to be fabulous. We're going to pay you really well. You'll have somewhere stable to live. We just need more employees. And you don't know any better. You don't know to question that as a scam or to ask for some sort of identification or, and what will happen a lot of times is that they will then say, after you get on the airplane, oh, we'll hold on to your passport for you and make sure that it's safe. And then they basically take your passport, and then on top of that, they tell you, a lot of times you'll be taken to a hotel or something like that, and you'll be shut up in the hotel with no passport, and then they will say, you're here illegally. If you talk to the police, they're going to put you in prison. They're going to beat you. You might even be killed. And in the United States, it seems obvious that, well, duh, that's not what the police do to people. But if you're from a country where that's absolutely what the police do to people, you don't know what to do. You don't speak the language. You don't know anybody there. Who are you going to call for help? And that's how a lot of people get sucked into the sex trafficking trade in the United States today. They're talking about a similar scam that happens to this family that basically, somebody puts them up in a hotel and then keeps charging them more and more and telling them they can't leave. Okay, that'll be today's segment. Thanks. Bye.